Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, a divide over voting rights as Democrats in Congress try to get two key bills across the finish line, what it means for voters and how we've seen this debate play out before. Celebrating and honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., urban historian Della Thomas shares his thoughts on Dr. King's influence today. And in this month's Black Voices Book Club, an homage to Chicago's Black history and culture. Illinois celebrates the first Muhammad Ali Day on Monday as well. A daughter of the boxing great reflects on her father's impact and legacy.
It felt like I was getting paid to play games, quite honestly, and do things that I would do in my free time.
And in tonight's Last Word, meet a local tech entrepreneur sharing why she thinks investment in Black startups is necessary. First off tonight, a battle over voting rights legislation in Washington, D.C. President Joe Biden and Democratic lawmakers are pushing for two bills that would set national standards for federal elections. The Freedom to Vote Act would expand voter registration, expand voting access with guidelines for mail-in voting and early voting, establish Election Day as a federal holiday, and prevent state lawmakers from redrawing districts so as to disadvantage Black and brown voters. Additionally, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would restore the Justice Department's authority to police election laws in states with a history of discrimination. That's a key component of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court stripped away in 2013. Joining us now with more are Christina Rivers, Associate Professor of Political Science at DePaul University, Stevie Valles, Executive Director of Chicago Votes, and Chantal Grant, the founder of Level Up and Vote. Thanks to the three of you for joining us. Stevie Valles, let's start with you, please. We know that the fight for federal voting rights legislation has been strengthened by a wave of Republican-led states implementing laws that essentially make it harder to vote in the name of election security. Illinois currently doesn't have such laws, so why should Chicagoans and Illinoisans care about what's happening?
Well, I think it's important for us as Chicagoans and Illinoisans to care because the fate of the rest of the country is tied to our fate here at home. Just because our legislature right now and in the past decade or so has been very good on voting issues doesn't mean that that's going to be the case in the future. So it's important for us to be very intentional and mindful of what's going on around the country. Because we're never safe here at home if attacks on voting rights are happening anywhere else across America.
Chantal Grant, activists have been pushing for the restoration of the Voting Rights Act since the Supreme Court dismantled it back in 2013. What do you think it's going to take to finally get this piece of legislation back in place?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely going to take a lot of outreach, right? Me coming from the south side of Chicago, where violence has plagued my communities, poor economic status, etc., it's very important that we reach everyone and we make sure that the message goes through because people power works, right? We've seen it numerous times. And it's important for people to understand what types of legislation is being introduced and pushed for everyone.
So President Biden and most congressional Democrats, they want to change the Senate rules so that a simple majority, that's just 51%, is needed to approve the legislation and overcome a Republican filibuster. Right now, 60 votes are needed. Professor Rivers, coming to you, Congress has reauthorized the Voting Rights Act multiple times. How is this different?
I think that really what stands out and an important aspect of the unified Republican resistance this time around is that what gets overlooked is that this resistance is completely out of step with the GOP's votes on previous reauthorizations of the Voting Rights Act. In the past, there was always vigorous partisan and ideological debates over those extensions and expansions of the law. But at the end of the day, the Senate overwhelmingly approved them. So, for example, in 1975, the Senate approved the reauthorization 77-12 votes. And in 1982, the Senate approved by an even higher margin of 85-8. And in 2006, the Senate unanimously approved the extensions of the Voting Rights Act. In that particular case, the Senate Republicans wrote a minority report expressing some of their reservations about some of those amendments, but they did vote to approve. So it was a very bipartisan history, and that really stands in sharp contrast to what we have today. I think what's also interesting is there are about 15 Republican senators now who are serving who voted for those reauthorizations in 2006.
And why isn't it bipartisan today? I mean, that's one of the things that we've heard from Senator Kyrsten Sinema. You know, her concerns about not supporting it is because of the lack of Republican support, and she doesn't want to push it through if it's not bipartisan. Does she have a point about the division in this country?
I would suppose that she has a point, but again, I think, you know, there is this history of bipartisanship that seems to be left out. It's difficult to separate partisanship when it comes to voting and representation from ideology, from race. It all gets really intermixed and interwoven, and that really can intensify the distinctions and the disagreements. I think what also gets left out of the mix is the role of the Supreme Court in taking the Voting Rights Act to a different place. On some level, it seems that minority report that Republicans authored in response to the 2006 reauthorization of the act seems to have become the majority position these days, at least amongst Senate Republicans.
Stevie Valles, do you feel like President Biden and lawmakers are doing enough to address this issue? What more action would you like to see?
You know, I'll say I'm happy that they're addressing this issue. It is an important issue. As someone who is in Chicago, who is blessed to live in a state where we have passed a lot of these laws that are going to be included in this legislation already, I would like to see more to address voter suppression and to proactively give more people access to the ballot and remove barriers. You know, in Illinois, we have things like online voter registration. We have extended early voting. Last election, we had ballot drop boxes. We expanded vote by mail. We have automatic voter registration. I do believe that there's more that can be put in this legislation that they're trying to move on the federal level to be more in line with what we have here in Illinois. But that's part of the fight. You know, we in states where we are able to pass more progressive voting rights laws, we have to keep doing that so that we can empower other states and hopefully the federal government to do the same in the future. But I would like to see more being done, but I'm happy that they're doing anything.
And Chantal Grant, you focus on engagement. What more can Chicagoans do to make their voices heard on this issue?
Absolutely. First is just to get educated, right? Just get educated. And I believe it's our politicians' responsibility is to seek out those who can thoroughly educate our people and just, you know, understand the legislation. Like, I was a part of State Representative LaShawn K. Ford when they're introducing legislation for making sure of the automatic voting and also for the voting in Cook County jails, right? And so that's a start, right? But we also have to look at this Freedom to Vote Act and make sure we're not taking that away, right, when it comes across federally. So I think it's a good start, and I think that it's very progressive.
And Professor Rivers, you know, we've got about 45 seconds left. What could it mean for voters if these changes that are in these bills aren't enacted?
It's going to make it a lot more difficult, or can make it increasingly difficult, I should say, for those who want to exercise their right to vote to exercise their right to vote. I think we also are very clear that some of these limitations disproportionately impact communities of color who have a history of their votes being suppressed from the beginning. So I think it means that voters are just going to have to work a lot harder to assert their rights. I know I am very encouraged by organizations such as Level Up and Chicago Votes here in Illinois, because they're wonderful models of civic engagement. And I think we'll just have to work much harder to encourage ourselves to become not simply civically engaged, but educated as well.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Stevie Valles, Chantal Grant, and Professor Christina Rivers for joining us.
Thank you.
The ongoing fight for voting rights comes as the nation marks Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. The civil rights leader was, of course, central to getting the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed into law. Monday is also an official day of service, encouraging Americans to give back to their communities in the spirit of Dr. King's vision of the beloved community. Here in Chicago, Dr. King led the Chicago Freedom Movement to fight for open and affordable housing. United Way of Metro Chicago will hold a Zoom webinar on Monday where local TikTok star and urban historian Sherman Dilla Thomas will share some facts about the movement in Chicago. We asked Dilla how Dr. King's civil rights activism is influencing the activists of today.
I think one of the things that we're seeing is Dr. King wasn't afraid of the technology of the time, right? And so what was the then sort of new technology was TV. He wasn't ever shy. He didn't shy away from being on film or stepping in front of the cameras to use his message. And the advocates, the activists of today need to be that same way with social media, right? So that's one of the parallels I see, just the willingness to use the newest available tools in the fight. And then the other thing is just overall youth. A lot of activists today are very young. I think about brother like Jamal Cole or Jamal Green, right? Both the Jamals here in Chicago, they both are really young activists. And that also is a parallel to Dr. King's life. He was really young in the fight.
And due to COVID, United Way of Metro Chicago is encouraging people to put together care kits for nonprofits. And several other Chicago organizations are hosting MLK Day celebrations this holiday weekend. You can find more details on our website. Up next, the latest selection in our Black Voices Book Club. A celebration of Black Chicago and the cultural contributions that helped shape the city is the focus of the latest selection in our Black Voices Book Club. The book, Energy Never Dies, Afro-optimism and Creativity in Chicago, takes readers through different points in time in Chicago's Black history and reflects on how those moments influence the creativity and achievements of entrepreneurs and artists today. Joining us now with more is author and WBEZ Vocalo content director, host, and producer Ayana Contreras. Ayana, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to have you.
Thank you. So many words.
A lot of words, yes. It's a mouthful. But what inspired you to write this book?
In my job as a radio host, I was able to speak to a lot of older artists and creative people and a lot of younger folks. And what I realized was there was such a really unique parallel between what they were saying, and there was so much connective tissue. They were saying so many of the same things, and I wanted to put them in conversation with each other. And I thought this book was a cool way to do it.
Now, let's talk about the title. Very powerful, and of course, there is a story behind that. Tell us about the title, Energy Never Dies.
So my grandmother gathered us around her kitchen table in West Chesterfield a few years back and told us she had stage 4 cancer. And, the whole family's kind of gathered around, and I'm sitting right next to her at the table, and everybody's very upset except myself and her. And finally, one member of the family asks out loud, well, why are you guys not upset? You should be upset. This is terrible. And my grandmother took a breath and said, well, energy never dies. And for me, I was working on the book at the time. It just immediately crystallized all the ideas that I was trying to capture in the book.
I think it's, as you say that, I think it's interesting that it was just you and she who weren't necessarily upset or showing your upsetness, the same way as everyone else at the table. Do you think, there's some of this, you get from her?
Oh, for sure. I know in so many ways I am her, like I'm the next like 2.0 version of her. But the other reason why I wasn't upset, and maybe why she wasn't upset, was because she lived her life. Do you know what I mean? Like, she took risks and tried things and wasn't afraid. And that's, I mean, when you live your life that way, it makes the end, I don't know, maybe a little easier to deal with.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're the energy that she was.
I'd like to think so.
Why is Chicago, why is it the right city for a book like this?
I thought about this because theoretically, a book like this could be written about a lot of cities, especially cities that have a beautiful, molten creative core. But Chicago specifically, not only were we really great at creating and have been great at creating this really exciting identity, self-determination, but we've been able to create a whole lot of media that was disseminated throughout the globe that actually demonstrates this concept. So everything from Ebony and Jet, which became publications of record for Black America, to music groups like Earth, Wind, and Fire and artists like Minnie Riperton.
The term Afro-optimism, of course, it is in the title, but it also it comes up a lot in the book. Tell us what Afro-optimism is, what it means.
So essentially, it's this concept that despite external pressures and oppression, that we do have ownership of how we represent ourselves in the world and what we're capable of doing. It was really something that was an immediate response to the concept of Afro-pessimism, which I heard a lot in recent years, which is basically that we are doomed by the fact of our Blackness because of these external pressures. And I wanted to take the onus off of those external pressures and put it onto us, not to say that things that we should ignore it or that it's not real, but that we have an amazing amount of creativity and power within that we can manifest.
Do you think, feeling hopeful or optimistic is something that, we as Black people struggle with, that it can be difficult to do?
So, I mean, everybody has trouble sometimes, especially in a moment like this globally, with being upbeat. And what I don't want people to take from the term Afro-optimism is some sort of toxic positivity, right? I think at the end of the day, what I want people to understand is the reason why Black people are where we are and where we will be 20 years from now, 50 years from now, is because somebody looked within themselves and said, okay, well, you know what, there's got to be something better. I'm going to keep moving, if not for me, but for my kids or my grandkids. Because if you look back, right, like we might be doom and gloom right this second when we look at, this video of police brutality or what have you. But if you think about where we were as a people 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there is definite progress, indisputable progress.
And Ayanna, we've got, 20 seconds left. Who is this book for?
Oh, it's for everybody. It's for the aunties. It's for all the people who need to be reminded of what we're capable of doing.
Okay, well said. Ayanna Contreras, thank you so much for joining us. Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Again, the book is called Energy Never Dies, Afro-Optimism and Creativity in Chicago. This Monday not only marks Martin Luther King Day, but in Illinois, it will also recognize the first Muhammad Ali Day. Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a resolution in August adding January 17th, Ali's birthday, to the list of commemorative school holidays in the state. To celebrate, the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, which advocated for the holiday, is holding a virtual event honoring the boxing legend. The event, titled Deliberate Dialogue, will feature several high-profile speakers, including Reverend Jesse Jackson and Ali's daughter, Maryam Ali.
When I think about what's going on in the country right now, what comes to mind the most are conversations that we would have about why he took the stands that he took, why he demanded his human and constitutional rights to choose the religion of his choice, why he confronted various forms of discrimination, oppression, and violence against African Americans and other non-ruling people of color, and why he so publicly and proudly had self-love, showed self-love and pride as an African American and a Muslim. And when you think about why he did these things, Muhammad Ali didn't exist in a vacuum, of course. He was defying centuries of false narratives about who we were as a people, hundreds of years of falsehoods about Black inferiority and white superiority. And that's really what it boils down to. He witnessed this himself in his hometown, unfortunately, of segregation, not being able to drink from certain water fountains, being made to feel less than human. And this really wore on him, as it did many African Americans.
Miriam Ali, their daughter of Muhammad Ali, who died in 2016 from Parkinson's disease. He would have turned 80 this year. Tech startups often rely on investors to get their business up and running, but tech entrepreneurs of color don't always get the same amount of funding as their white counterparts. According to data from Crunchbase, just under 3% of venture capital funding in 2020 went to Black and Latino tech startups. That unequal playing field is what led to the creation of Tech Rise, a Chicago initiative to support and fund Black and Latino-owned tech companies. It was started by P33, a Chicago nonprofit supporting the city's tech community.
I think when a lot of people think of startups, they still think of a white male in a hoodie building a company in a garage or a basement. And the reality is that great ideas come from everywhere. But unfortunately, access to capital, networks, and knowledge does not. So it's critical that we look at idea stage founders as the earliest opportunity to infuse capital and access to the networks and knowledge that they need to take their businesses to the next level.
Through weekly pitch competitions, Tech Rise has awarded more than $900,000 to more than 40 Black and Latino founded startups since launching in April. It held a finale event last month where some of the best of Chicago's tech industry competed for the largest prize yet, $100,000. The winner of that funding is the founder of a cybersecurity business, Christine Igzwalcour. She's also participating in a national ad campaign to showcase Chicago's top tech leaders. We caught up with her during a photo shoot for tonight's The Last Word.
My name is Dr. Christine Igzwalcour, and I'm the founder and CEO of Cyber Pop-Up. Cyber Pop-Up is an on-demand cybersecurity platform that's powered by vetted and highly skilled freelancers. So I remember throughout my career, I just got exposure to a lot of different cybersecurity challenges, one of them being that companies of all sizes are getting breached and experiencing different attacks, but most companies don't have a cybersecurity team in-house. Large companies do, sure, but a lot of the smaller ones don't. And so I really created Cyber Pop-Up as an on-demand platform where folks can get access to that cybersecurity expert that they need right when they need it. So I started out trying to be an eye doctor. I failed very miserably at that, which I am very thankful for because it forced me to sort of explore different areas and figure out what I was passionate about. And in that, I discovered the cybersecurity space. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. It felt like I was getting paid to play games, quite honestly, and do things that I would do in my free time. And so I really enjoyed that and eventually just shifted my entire focus to the cybersecurity space. There's different layers to the challenges of diversity in tech. I started noticing the problem very early on because I studied this in school, right? And so I still remember being in my classes and realizing that I was often the only woman in the class or the only person of color in the class. It stems down to the exposure at earlier ages and realization that this is a career path. Like I mentioned, I wasn't trying to get into cybersecurity at all. It was kind of an accident that I fell into and then absolutely loved. And so I think there's that early exposure of people understanding and seeing examples and things of folks who come from different backgrounds who are successful in these areas. Once you get into corporate America or into some of these organizations, I think it can be hard to feel included or a little bit challenging to actually grow and flourish. One of the things that I struggled with is trying to fit in and essentially at some points trying to be somebody that I wasn't, just to make sure that, in this area where I'm, sticking out like a sore thumb, I wanted to make sure that that didn't distract people from the value that I could contribute. So I think that that's another area of challenge personally for me in the past, and something that I think organizations or anybody who's trying to make a shift in diversity in tech has to pay attention to as well. As you become successful at bringing folks from different backgrounds into an organization or into a place, how do you make sure that they feel included? And how do you make sure that everyone's okay with being their authentic selves? Because it's only then that you truly get the maximum output and potential from people.
Iswaquor says TechRise is one way to bring more diversity to the industry. A new season of the program kicks off this April, and you can find out more on our website. And that is our show for this weekend. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News, including what sources are saying about Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin's plans to enter the Republican race for Illinois governor. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And join me and Paris Schutz next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.